So the Supreme Court just found in a unanimous decision that the warrantless entry and seizure of firearms in the case Caniglia v. Strom was indeed unconstitutional under the Fourth Amendment. So let's talk about this. But real quick before we jump into this video, if you think that police officers should not enter your home and seize your firearms without a warrant or your consent, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. I also want to give a shout out to one of the main sponsors of the channel, that is USCCA. Through your membership, you get training, education, and self-defense liability protection. So if you carry a firearm, I highly recommend you look into USCCA, and I'll put a link to them down in the details section. So Caniglia v. Strom, this is a case we've covered on this channel before, and we covered it right after the oral arguments before the Supreme Court. But for those of you who aren't aware of what this case entails, let me just give you a quick rundown of what all this involves. So what this case all involves is it really is an argument between a husband and wife. What happened is the couple was arguing, and then Mr. Caniglia went and actually got a handgun and then put it on the table and said, well, why don't you just put me out of my misery? Eventually, Mrs. Caniglia went and stayed at a hotel that night. And when she woke up in the morning, she decided to call her husband, and she couldn't get a hold of her husband. Concerned that he wasn't answering, she called the police and asked if they could check up on him. And then she showed up to the house with the police officers, and Mr. Caniglia was there. They actually met him at the front porch, and the police officers were asking him about the situation. He confirmed that they did have that dispute the day before, and then they asked if he was suicidal. He said, "No, I'm not suicidal." The police thought he was a risk to himself, so they called an ambulance, and the ambulance was going to take him to a psychiatric hospital where he can get checked out. During that discussion with Mr. Caniglia, he said that they could not seize his firearms, to not go into his house and seize his firearms. He did not give them consent to do so, and the police officers said that they would not. Well, after Mr. Caniglia left, the police officers, I guess, made misrepresentations to the wife, saying that he actually consented to them seizing the firearms. She took them to the house, showed them the firearms. It was 2 handguns, and they seized those. And so that's kind of what this case all arose out of. The police officers and the First Circuit found that the police officers could actually enter the home under the community caretaking exception under the case Cady. Cady v. Dombrowski is a 1973 Supreme Court case where essentially they found that there was this community caretaking exception when it came to vehicles. And when, in that case, a vehicle was impounded after an accident, the police officers were able to do a community caretaking search of the trunk of that vehicle for a firearm. And in this case, Caniglia v. Strom, the whole question is whether or not that community caretaking kind of exception under Cady, whether it extended beyond just vehicles to home searches as well, whether or not police officers could enter a home without a warrant, consent, or some other exception under their community caretaking guidelines or concerns, enter a home, search, and potentially seize firearms as well. Well, we just got a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court 9-0, finding that in Cady, that community caretaking exception that applied to vehicles did not extend beyond vehicles to the home as well. Now, the majority opinion was written by Justice Thomas, and then there were some concurrence opinions as well for some justices who wanted to clarify some points. And I'll just read through some of the language here from Justice Thomas, from Justice Alito, Kavanaugh, all those individuals, so you can kind of get an idea of where everybody stood on this decision. So this is coming from Justice Thomas. He wrote, "The Fourth Amendment protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizures. The very core of this guarantee is the right of a man to retreat into his own home and there be free from unreasonable government intrusions." Justice Thomas then went on to state that what is reasonable for vehicles is different from what is reasonable for homes. Cady acknowledged as much, and this court has repeatedly declined to expand the scope of exceptions to the warrant requirement to permit warrantless entry into the home. And so the main thing in Justice Thomas's opinion is he's saying there is a very big distinction between being secure in your home and being secure in a vehicle. Cady dealt with being secure in a vehicle, you not having this high expectation of privacy and being secure in your vehicle, but your home is so much different. In the Constitution and history, we understood that you have the right to be secure in your home. That is your castle. And to extend this decision in Cady to something like your home is just too far of a stretch. Now, outside of Justice Thomas's majority opinion, you have some concurring opinions. And essentially, it's that they are agreeing with the general outcome of the case. Again, it was a 9-0 decision. So everybody unanimously found that this was unconstitutional. But you had some justices write some concurring opinions wanting to clarify some points. One of those was Justice Roberts, the chief judge, in which Breyer joined in the concurrence. And so here what you have is they state a warrant to enter a home is not required. We explained when there is a need to assist persons who are seriously injured or threatened with such injury. Nothing in today's opinion is to the contrary. So they're just trying to clarify some things, that there are some exceptions, maybe exigency, when officers could enter a home without a warrant or consent or anything like that. But under those exigent circumstances, when someone's like injured or in severe risk of death or bodily injury, then maybe officers could enter a home. So they're just trying to clarify that, not saying that at no point could an officer enter a home without a warrant. Then you had Justice Alito write a concurrence as well. And the main emphasis of Justice Alito's concurrence was he was trying to distinguish some things that they did not address in this opinion. One of the main things that he said is that they did not address things like red flag laws. If you're not familiar with what red flag laws are, there are court procedures in which someone can petition the court and get a court order to seize firearms from someone because they are at risk of themselves, of injuring themselves, or maybe someone else. Here you have Justice Alito saying they did not address that here in this case. And then Justice Alito also talked about the whole issue of elderly or maybe even suicidal individuals and maybe needing some sort of procedure where people can get these kind of medical concern warrants from the state government or someone else. But again, he's saying we're not necessarily addressing that here. And then you had a concurrence by Justice Kavanaugh, and I'll read some quotes for you from his concurrence. He states, "I write separately to underscore and elaborate on the Chief Justice's points that the court's decision does not prevent police officers from taking reasonable steps to assist those who are inside a home and in need of aid." So again, like the Chief Justice said, that there is not this preclusion from officers potentially entering without a warrant because someone's at risk of death or severe injury. Maybe you have these exigent circumstance exceptions where you can enter a home. And so Kavanaugh just kind of reiterating that in his concurrence. He goes on to state that police officers may enter a home without a warrant in circumstances where they are reasonably trying to prevent a potential suicide or to help an elderly person who has been out of contact or may have fallen and suffered a serious injury. So this is actually interesting. If you watch the oral arguments or you listen to the oral arguments, Kavanaugh again was making these statements about how the main question and the oral argument questions kind of fell into two buckets when you're dealing with potential suicides and when you're dealing with the elderly. And so here he's just kind of clarifying that again. And then he goes on to say how this all probably is just a labeling issue. They're trying to fit all these things into a community caretaking exception when really it just falls under exigency. He states that if someone is at risk of serious harm and it is reasonable for officers to intervene now, that is enough for the officers to enter. So that's kind of talking about the whole exigency and reasonableness for that exigency. So overall, this is a huge win, and especially a huge win for a 9-0 unanimous decision finding that this community caretaking exception and warrantless entry and seizure of firearms was indeed unconstitutional. Now, this doesn't have huge implications for the 2A aspect, not right now. We'll see how some things play out, and maybe this case is cited down the road for other things, maybe like red flag laws and challenges to those. But again, this is a huge win because you have all the justices aligning and actually saying that, hey, this Fourth Amendment violation was indeed unconstitutional. So if you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below and I'll try to answer the best of my ability. Also, I want to ask you guys to please like, comment, subscribe, and make sure you hit that notification bell because right now YouTube is pretty much just destroying our analytics, is suppressing our videos, unsubscribing a lot of people. So just double check your stuff, make sure you're still subscribed, you're still getting the videos, share it around because right now just YouTube is kind of playing their game. So I'd greatly appreciate it if you guys help me with the algorithm and help push out this really good news right now for our constitutional rights. So as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.